Good morning and welcome. We'll just give it another 2 or 3 more minutes before we get started today. All right, I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alex Beck. I am the Welcoming Communities Manager for the BDCC. It is a regional initiative in supporting new Vermonters and immigrants of a variety of backgrounds here in Windham and Bennington counties. And we normally host our Southern Vermont Providers Network meeting. And we are also always happy to host the quarterly consultation for the Ethiopian Community Development Council. So welcome to everyone. I think perhaps maybe I will turn it over to Tracy, if you want to both kind of start the meeting and if you want to provide any additional context around what the quarterly consultation is, and then we can dive in with our partners at ECDC.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tracy Dolan, and I am the director of the State Refugee Office. That's the refugee office that is located in the Agency of Human Services. Every quarter we are asked to hold a quarterly consultation meeting and with relevant communities. We do this twice a year in this meeting because other meetings that we have that are statewide also count as that quarterly meeting. So we're supposed to have 4 meetings a year so that community members can really discuss what's going well, so we can get feedback. And by we, I'm doing a royal we there, we meaning our office, but also, of course, the refugee resettlement agencies, schools, and all the partners. So we do it twice during the year in this forum. We also do a similar one in Rutland a couple of times a year via Zoom. And then we have our larger refugee service provider meetings that are statewide. And because Vermont is relatively small, we count those too. So what's going on? Well, I can just give you some numbers because I had to pull some numbers for the governor's State of the State speech. I was really happy to hear the governor talk about refugee resettlement and the great work that resettlement has done. For the calendar year, normally we talk about federal fiscal year, but I'll just describe to you calendar year because we pull those numbers. So last year in calendar year 2023, January through December, in the state, we resettled approximately just under 500 folks. That includes people who came in through the resettlement agencies, so ECDC and also USCRI. It also includes some people who came in through secondary migration, and that is in migration when they come from another state but still come and get services. And then it also includes about 40 people that were resettled through the Manchester organization Grace Initiatives, and they are resettling Cubans and Haitians and some others as well. And so that was about the number. That doesn't mean that no other people came here with any other status, but those are the folks that received services or that we assisted in resettling in some way through our organizations. And again, it doesn't include asylum seekers. It includes people who have a status that allows them to get benefits for the most part and get help with resettling. This coming fiscal year, we're probably going to be closer to 600. And that actually includes this coming federal fiscal year as well. So the coming calendar year or federal fiscal year, actually similar numbers there. It'll be about 550. We're hopeful if housing holds up, I mean, that's probably something we're going to talk about today. And then 550 coming in through the resettlement agencies, again, USCRI and ECDC. So a reminder there, the 4 sites are Brattleboro, Bennington, and Rutland and Colchester. But also probably another 40 again through the Manchester program Grace Initiatives. Again, if we're able to keep the housing going. We are hearing that there are some changes happening in employment, for example. So for a while, we had employers very eager to hire, and they still are. But the nature of the refugees arriving were such that a lot of them, a lot more than usual, I would say, had some English proficiency, and there were more full-time jobs available. What we're hearing now from resettlement agencies and also from the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation and also from AALV, those are all organizations that help people find employment. We're hearing that, the English language limitations are challenging. We're also hearing that folks are finding part-time jobs, not as many full-time as quickly. And of course, jobs that are on a bus line or on some kind of transportation line are, we are saturating that market depending on the size of the community. And so it's getting a little more challenging. So some of the things that refugees need when they come are jobs that they can get to. And sometimes an employer will provide transportation that particularly helps if you have a group. And sometimes jobs are such that you can be on a bus line. But as we look for housing farther out in more rural areas or more out of the way, then the transportation for work becomes an issue. So those are some of the things happening in our world. And I just wanted to mention Welcome Corps is another pathway to resettlement. And those are refugees who do not come in through the resettlement agencies. And up until now, Vermont hasn't had any groups confirmed for Welcome Corps, but now we are seeing groups submit for Welcome Corps. So that's a group of individuals in a community who get trained, raise some funds, and then submit an application to the feds to say we would like a refugee. There's 2 kinds. There's one where you simply say, I'd like a refugee, and you don't name the person. And then there's the other one, the named phase, where you sponsor someone you know. Both kinds are beginning to happen now. There is online support, and there are some online sessions to help some people with that first application. And then basically when the refugee arrives, that group acts like a refugee resettlement agency and provides all those first services. There's no payment involved for this. In fact, they have to raise funds. But it's slowly beginning. I don't know how big that'll get in Vermont. We'll have to see. And it's expected that once you put in an application, especially if you name the refugee, it could be anywhere from 6 months to a few years before arrival, depending on the status and where they are. And then, I will just give you an update. In your region, of course, many refugees begin by staying at the School for International Training campus in Brattleboro. And we are supporting that with some state funds and some federal funds. And, we are in discussion. I am in the discussion with my state partners about a possible continuation of those funds. We don't have a long-term sustainable funding plan for that kind of model, in the same way that in Chittenden County, because of the housing crisis, folks are going in motels and hotels. And again, there's no federal funding line for that. The feds never anticipated having to support that. So right now, when refugees arrive, all the funding they have really is their small reception grant when they arrive. It's about $1,300. And so normally they would put that money immediately into a security deposit or first or last month's rent. But when they're also having to stay in hotels and motels for a while, that becomes depleted. And so if wherever possible, the resettlement agencies or the state are trying to help in those first couple of months if they're having to spend resources on hotels and motels. No easy plan for that right now, but it is looking somewhat hopeful within state government to get some continued support for that. And I've been updating World Learning, ECDC, and USCRI every week on that, but it's looking relatively positive. It's just more of a timing issue, I think. Thank you.
Great. It's not technically on the agenda, but it is flu and COVID season. So, Allie, if you have anything to say, chime in. If not, we can absolutely just move towards the update from ECDC.
Good morning,
Here,
everyone. Yeah, good morning. I was just gonna say I don't have any particular like resources or anything else to share with you all at this moment, but definitely just want to say I'm glad to be here. So thanks.
thank you. All right, without further ado, I think I'll hand it over to Mark, who will be providing the update and consultation today. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everybody. Most of you are used to seeing Joe on this call, but Joe is traveling, visiting family, so he asked me to step in for today. So now I'm just gonna move towards sharing my screen. Okay. So I thought we'd start just by talking about this month marks a 2-year anniversary of when ECDC started resettling in southern Vermont. So I thought we'd just quickly run through some of the numbers to give you a point of comparison. But in 2022, we resettled 121 individuals in southern Vermont. Most of those were in Brattleboro, some were over in Bennington. We had a really high retention rate. Only 9 individuals out-migrated during 2022, and the remainder still reside here in Vermont. And for those that arrived last year, we have at least one household member who is employed. For 2023, the number increased to 165 refugees. Again, most of them in Brattleboro, some in Bennington as well. For the arrivals, most of them arrived in the latter half of the year. So the beginning was a little bit slower, and then we were very busy between July and the end of the year when we received 108 of the total 165. You can see the demographic breakdown there. Unlike 2022, when the vast majority were Afghans, in 2023, the majority are Eritrean. We still are receiving a sizable number of Afghans as well, with smaller numbers from other areas. In Bennington, most of the clients that we received were from Afghanistan, and we had some Congolese as well. There was some outmigration. Most of the outmigration that occurs in our experience is because individuals have either friends or family located elsewhere in the US. Oftentimes, especially around family, the initial intent is to settle them where their family is located, but because the federal systems don't always capture that information in the process, they may arrive in Vermont and then choose at that point upon arrival to migrate to a different location where their family is located. For 2024, you can see our numbers are again larger, although I will add the caveat that we've actually lowered our overall projections for FY24 based on primarily the housing situation. We're having an increasingly difficult time finding permanent housing for our clients. And so that has caused us to rethink what might be possible. And we've actually lowered our FY24. I believe we were originally at 150 for Brattleboro. We've decreased that to 120. And initially we were at 75 for Bennington, and that has been lowered down to 60. Family sizes vary from individuals to families of 6. Educational background, again, also varied. As Tracy said, we've been receiving a greater number of clients that do not necessarily have a high level of English upon arrival, and that has had an impact on our ability at times to find employment, or at least slowed that process somewhat. You can see some of the areas where our clients have professional backgrounds. It's also quite varied. And for this languages, we have speakers of Pashto, Dari, Kinyarwanda, Tigrayan, Swahili, Lingala, and French. For those that arrived in 2023, at least one member of the household is employed, other than those that are more recent arrivals that still remain housed up at SIT. We have clients that have applied for college, and some have enrolled in CCV in advanced English. At the moment, we have, I believe, 57 individuals housed up at SIT in transitional housing. But we have found permanent housing for 199 persons that arrived last year. Other than those that are more recent arrivals, we've connected them with a primary care physician and completed their domestic health assessments. 99% of the Afghans seeking asylum to date have had their cases submitted to USCRI, and we're happy to say that we had 15 individuals approved for green cards. A number of the majority of the people that have arrived have been working towards getting their driver's license, and for those that get their license, some have also purchased a vehicle. And we have seen some improvements in conversational English among those clients that perhaps arrived with lower levels or no English at all. And we do see some slow cultural adjustment among some of the refugees, particularly married women who are facing barriers at times to employment. As I said, we have 57 individuals up at the SIT campus. I think most people are familiar with the type of support services that ECDC and World Learning offer, but there's a list of those to just kind of give you an idea of what the process looks like. Usually upon arrival, some of the first things we do are enrollment in state benefits, searching for employment, working towards, as I said before, getting their domestic health assessment completed. And then usually once we are able to gain employment for those individuals, then we look towards housing, although it's not necessarily the case that we always wait. But with the funds being limited the way they are, and actually with the housing crisis kind of taking shape as it has, the process for finding housing, permanent housing, has slowed significantly since last year. Last year, for the individuals who arrived, oftentimes their stay at SIT was measured in weeks. These days, we have clients that have actually completed their RNP 90-day period and are still residing up at SIT, again, because of the issues around employment and finding permanent housing. As Tracy alluded to, the local transportation is incredibly important for our clients. They use it to attend English language classes at the community center and for their employment. And the second and third shift employment still remains an ongoing issue since the local bus does not serve SIT campus to accommodate people that might be working second and third shift employment. So transportation definitely is having an impact on employment at times. For the clients that are up at SIT, we do a Friday grocery run. Sometimes we take them over to Walmart for supplies. We do a weekly run to area donation organizations and food banks as well. And for that, we use our ECDC van to transport the clients. And as, again, Tracy said, the temporary housing at SIT is currently being paid for by the state. This funding is expected to be depleted, possibly the end of February or by March. And there are ongoing efforts to try to secure additional funding to allow this transitional housing to continue. As we all know, housing in Vermont is a challenge at the moment. Again, significant changes from last year when we were able to place people much more quickly. It's taking much longer these days. And because of that, the importance of having transitional housing up at SIT is becoming more and more important for us. It provides people a safe location upon arrival, and gives us time to search for that employment and permanent housing. Again, as I mentioned, the public transportation is an issue, with service being limited on the weekends up at SIT. And then finally, the hiring of additional staff here at ECDC. We do have some open positions. I would refer you to Indeed.com for open positions, but we have positions both in Brattleboro and Bennington that we're currently trying to fill. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mark, was that the update for Bennington as well, or are you doing a separate update focusing on Bennington?
Sorry, that was for Bennington as well. There were Bennington numbers in there. I can go back if that's.
I was just wondering, I think you spoke about where folks are living when they first arrive for the Brattleboro side. Is that also, are the Bennington arrivals also going into SIT? If you could just speak to that briefly.
Sure. We have had some Bennington clients who have stayed at SIT. Bennington is in a slightly better position around housing because we have an MOU with a couple property management companies over there. And so we've had better success at putting clients into housing upon arrival. We also have an apartment over there that we have tended to use for transitional housing for a period of months. But I believe, and Jack from Bennington can correct me on this, but I believe clients may be using that now as permanent housing.
Yeah, so we do have, as Mark said, this really excellent relationship with a large landlord and property manager here, and through them we do have apartments. And it's looked a little different at different times, but he's correct. There have been apartments that have served as temporary housing, and those have been really important because even though we're getting a lot of people into permanent housing, having some period of time where people can start to adjust before having to take on the immediate rental obligations, and also figuring out with a landlord how moving costs will be handled, often that's challenging. And so having transitional housing available, even if it's not SIT, has been really important to our efforts here. But yeah, we have, for the most part, Bennington clients have come directly to Bennington. There have only been a couple of people who have gone to SIT before coming here. But that resource has also helped us a lot when we're finding housing here in Bennington, because we know that there is somewhere people would be able to come here in Southern Vermont while we're still identifying housing for them if there's ever a time when we're in a real crunch around the apartments that are available locally.
And there was a question in the chat. Alex, is it okay if I hit those chat questions?
Absolutely.
Sure. So Sadie Fisher asked, is there a contingency plan? And so this is probably for ECDC and World Learning to kind of talk to. Is there a contingency plan for what will happen if the funding for SIT transitional housing is not renewed? I'm guessing one of the contingency plans is the reduction in refugees arriving, but what's the contingency plan other than that? And I'll kick it over to the two of you to discuss that.
Sure. Do you want me to start, Tim, or do you want to?
Sure. If you want to start, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if we lose access to SIT because of the funding, we are probably facing the reality that we are going to be putting our clients directly into hotels if we don't have permanent housing ready upon arrival, which has been the case. And as Tracy said, it's an extremely difficult situation, given that the funding that exists for clients is, as she said, about $1,300 per person. So as you can imagine, they will be going through those existing funds much more quickly, staying in a hotel than what we're currently doing up at SIT. The other part that I would just mention is that, as we all know, there are a finite number of hotels in the Brattleboro area. And those that have a daily rate that might be possible for our clients, some of those are already under state contract for unhoused populations. So it leaves us with a very small number of hotels available that we would be able to utilize for that that transitional housing until we can get them into permanent housing.
I can say, at least from the World Learning side, that even if we are to end up running out of funding at the end of February, we are of course not kicking anyone off of our campus. Those who are currently on our campus would be welcome to stay, as long as needed until permanent housing is found. But we would not really be in a position to take on any additional folks. So, I mean, we will dip into, whatever organization, or organizational resources we can find to, try to cover those costs. And obviously we'd like to try to get those folks into permanent housing as quickly as possible, even regardless of the, the funding situation. But we would not be, kicking anyone off of our campus starting March 1 if we don't have funding.
Great, thank you. I see Jeff Lewis, and then we'll go to Randy. I see hands up. So Jeff.
This is really a little bit of a nit, I guess, but if people are staying on the SIT campus for 90 days, that is, we're running through their R&P period, what kind of support is there for them from caseworkers when housing is finally found for them and they move into the economy, so to speak? Because that sounds awkward to me. So I'm just wondering how that transition gets managed.
Yeah, we're not stopping working with people simply because they're beyond their 90 days. So for some, they might be enrolled in a secondary program that would allow direct case management support. But the reality is, again, we're a little short-staffed, but our case managers continue to work with people even if they're beyond the 90-day period.
And I can just enhance that answer as well. So there are actually reception and placement is a 90-day program, but it is only one of the resources that are available to resettlement agencies. Refugee support services, which comes from my office, goes often for a full year. I mean, more if people have time and can do it, but certainly they serve people up to a year or more. And BDCC gets that funding, and so does ECDC. In addition, the resettlement agencies also get funding directly from the feds for other kinds of programs for certain families who might need more support. So there are other kinds of programs that give family support beyond the 90 days. The 90 days is more of that intensive, talking to a family probably every other day to get them signed up, et cetera. But there are other programs in general that will provide additional support beyond that.
Yeah, I guess I was also wondering the welcome money or whatever you called it. It's a technical name, Tracy, but that is supposed to expire after 90 days. So if somebody has not moved off campus in 90 days and hasn't used their welcome money for a down payment on an apartment, that money's gone, right? So where are we for them? I mean,
So
well, I'll pass you off to Mark. That money isn't gone. I think they manage it differently. Mark, can you explain how you manage that?
Or Caitlin, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say that those funds get cashed out and given to the family. And while working with the family, we would let them know that this money really needs to be saved and utilized for housing. And, we don't keep the money, we don't send the money back. So if they haven't expired all of their funds at 90 days, they are written a check for the remainder of the funds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say from the employment side of things is that, the nature of our work is we know these folks pretty well. And so we know the folks who are still on campus and we know the reasons why. And those are often barriers to employment or housing or the combination of the two. And a great example is, a single mother with 2 kids who both needs to be home for them when they're home from school, needs at least a 2-bedroom, or a 1-bedroom is tough for a parent and 2 kids. And so like those are good examples of just some of those barriers as to why some folks it's harder for them to transition off campus. And those are the folks who keep us up at night from the employment services, because it's a tricky situation to find a gig that pays well enough 8 to 3 so they can, and so again, this is and some, the client I'm referring to works also, 4 days a week, as many hours as they can get. And so it is just a very tricky problem that is the intersection of the kinds of housing we have available, and other people's availability. But,
And I'd just like to piggyback off of Alex for a second. And I know some folks might be like, well, why wouldn't the kids go to after school programs? Currently, all of our elementary age students go to academy school, which is not in downtown Brattleboro. And there's no bus services for after school programs for children to get home. So that adds an additional barrier to accessing certain after school programs. And there are a variety of after school programs, and some might have transportation from the school to the after school program if it's not actually at the school. However, there's nothing to then get the children back to SIT or to their homes if they're outside of, if the family doesn't have transportation.
Caitlin, would you be able to clarify that program, that school that you just mentioned that has after-school activities but no transportation? Is that part of the supervisory district, or is that some kind of private school?
No, that's academy school. That's definitely through the supervisory district.
Thank you.
It's a challenge that any parent without transportation would have. And so though we've explored lots of options, and certainly there's state funding for after school programs as far as subsidies concerned, especially though it's usually based on income for up to the first year. I believe it's covered at 100% for refugees, regardless of income. But again, it's an access issue having to do with transportation that all Vermonters face, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're welcome to maybe kick that over to me offline. Maybe we can talk a little bit about if there's any other resources or something I might be able to do on my end. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
This is, I think, an excellent transition. I saw, Randy, you had your hand up. I don't think Randy's going to offer to run a bus line for the after school programs, but there is other great stuff you've been up to. But yeah, Randy.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. I would still like to hear from Caitlin. I'll put my contact information in the chat, but this is the first I've heard about a need for that program, and there is a chance that we might have something. I don't know, but until we talk, which I hope we can do soon, we'll certainly look into it. It's not to be ruled out. I just wanted to talk about the other two transportation issues that were mentioned earlier about weekends and evenings. We expect to start operating a microtransit program in Brattleboro on April 1st, thanks to Jen and Alex's hard work to get us a grant to operate. It would go from 5 to 11:30 at night, Monday through Friday, free, open to the public, anywhere within the town limits of Brattleboro. We have not gone public with it yet, nor will I, until the rider software that we've been using in another town is modified to fit Brattleboro's needs. Most of these ride requests would be booked online from a phone or a computer after hours, and we're still working that out with a software company. So until that's been installed in another application and we've tested it, I'm reluctant to start talking about Brattleboro microtransit, but we think, again, through BDCC's hard work and generosity, we can at least do a 9-month program through December 31st. We will apply for a third time to the state for long-term funds, and we've applied to the town of Brattleboro for funds. So if BDC gets us going here, we hope we can sustain it, but more to come soon as we can make sure we're comfortable with the software. And the last point I wanted to make was SIT on weekends. We just redesigned our Saturday schedule, and public transit's got to go through quite a series of hurdles to make any schedule changes. And we spent 3 months doing this to accommodate other needs in Brattleboro on Saturday. And had I known that the SIT had an issue for Saturdays, I would have wrapped those into this process. I'm happy to go back out and start the process all over again. But I guess I'm reluctant to do that until everybody gets a better feel, through nobody's fault, but through the system, about if we go to change the system and the transportation up there, is SIT going to be funded to house people? What is the long-term prognosis, which we just discussed, is up in the air, but I'm willing to make those changes and incorporate that for some service on Saturday. Only if we all have a reasonable expectation that this thing's going to work long term.
Great. Thank you, Randy and Tim, for the kudos. One last thing I wanted to just touch on with transportation. Not a lot of answers, but something we're all actively working on as a region is just more access to driver's education. Again, don't have an immediate answer for our communities right now, but it is front and center. I took a group of gentlemen up to a training in Burlington, and I'd say 80% of the car ride was talking about buying cars, getting driver's licenses, and I think that is something that's really foundational, not just for work, but pretty much everything, accessing community and the economy, groceries, visiting your friends and family. So that's something we're really trying to lean into, not just from an employment perspective as well. Yeah, Tracy.
Yeah, Alex, I wonder, in a nutshell, I saw that we are lacking the resources available in the Brattleboro-Bennington area for driver's ed. Is it the test that we have to leave Brattleboro-Bennington for, or the actual instructional sessions? And about how many instructional sessions does it tend to be?
I think this is we can talk, I think, maybe more offline about it, but I think there's our partners at the DMV generally have been great, except we don't have a DMV in Windham County that's open. But it's generally the driver's education. I think when folks show up to the test, at this point, we know what accommodations are in place, and DMV knows what accommodations should be in place. Folks, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really that preparation and practice,
Yeah. And the preparation is with a driving instructor, and normally that's several sessions, just as a ballpark, several sessions.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a class, so it can either be done with that instructor, or you can get your practice hours elsewhere. And so that's what we've been talking with the Vermont Afghan Alliance, is that they have a car and someone to do practice driving, practice tests, bring people to their exams, use the car to take the tests. That's like well cared for, but I think it's really the driver's education classes themselves that there's a funding gap, and because there's a funding gap, it's hard to get providers to commit to serving.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I know that when we have driving classes, on Saturdays at the MCC in Brattleboro, those instructors are coming from Rutland. And the number of folks that can be enrolled in a class versus the wait list that we have is very, very small. And there is no equivalent in Bennington, which is an access issue. And we haven't been able to gain traction on that at this point, though I know that it's something that's been discussed and, certainly is on the radar of ECDC and BDCC.
Yeah, I can talk to the Vermont, and I think there was a connection, right, with the Vermont Department of Labor. Not a connection, let me clarify that. I believe there was some sort of reduction, right, in the Vermont Department of Labor support for this. And I have a good advocate within that department who's very attuned to this. So I'll do some reaching out. I just wanted to be clear there that it's about those instructional sessions particularly. That's the highest need.
Yes, and I know that BDCC just last week got information from ECDC in Brattleboro and Bennington in regards to numbers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to double check that the VDOL is probably the right next step. So thank you.
And the last thing I'll say is that, there's, when and if we identified a long-term consistent funding stream for driver's education, that's when we can seriously talk about a new business. Maybe there's a new Vermonter who wants to start their own business in Southern Vermont to be a driver's education provider. It's impossible for us to say, start a business to do this. And then they'll say, okay, great. How do I get paid? And we'll say, don't know right now, right? So I think that if we can say, hey, there's at least a couple years or a consistent funding stream, that's when we can talk about building capacity locally. But like right now, we can't convince the guy in Rutland to come because he's like, I don't know if, there's enough money to run a class right now or more than one class. So I think that's where we are. It's building capacity locally in Southern Vermont is really the long-term goal in meeting this need. And Wendy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Wendy Morrison. I'm the regional manager with the Vermont Department of Labor in Addison, Bennington, and Rutland County. And I'm very familiar with the whole all-state driving instruction because I'm the one that signs off on all these plans for this. So I can kind of give you a little bit of an insight in terms of where Department of Labor's challenge has been in funding just driving instruction for individuals. One, we fully 100%, 1000% agree that driving instruction for this specialized population is something that is very needed, and we would love to support every single individual who needs to access these services. The struggle is around how we're using our money. Our money is really designed towards more towards pre-vocational skills, occupational skills, work experiences, on-the-job training, and not necessarily just funding driving instruction. So we can certainly do and fund driving instruction for certain individuals where it makes the most sense within their employment plan. We definitely want to continue to support that. But that can't be the only thing that we're funding for those individuals. Like, it has to be a really comprehensive plan that helps them move forward within their transition into the labor force and beyond. And so I think that's been the biggest struggle in terms of wanting to work with this population. Like, we would take referrals from any, and we do, from any entity who wants to refer somebody to Department of Labor. We will absolutely work with them in assessing sort of where their skills are, where their goals are, and help tie in a comprehensive employment plan to help that individual meet those goals and move forward in our labor force. And sometimes that does include driving instruction, and sometimes that doesn't right off the bat, but doesn't mean that it won't include it down the road. So it's really an individual by individual basis. So anyway, that's kind of where we're standing right now with that.
Wendy, can you clarify, you're with the Department of Labor?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And so it sounds like you do know, right, that other folks are doing some employment planning. So it sounds like you would work with them and have a joint employment plan. Okay. And do you already work with refugees and have refugees with an employment plan that you're already working with?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
So what you're saying is driving lessons could be part of that plan, and therefore that's one way to pay for it.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think I'm hearing from the group that payment is one issue, but the bigger issue sounds like whether or not we can even get instructors. But thank you.
And so this is where the complicated nature of Vermont's braided funding model comes in, is that, we need to know that, our driving instructors need to say, I can't run this course unless I have 8 students. And those 8 students need to know how this course is being paid for, as does the provider. And so if there's a way to aggregate who's been approved for these driver's education programs so that, an instructor can run a course with everyone, I mean, I think that's possible. But I think, again, the cohort driven model is both more cost effective and is more likely to get a reliable training provider. So I think that's something we may just need to collaborate more on, is that I understand people become eligible. Yeah, go ahead.
The difference between Brattleboro and Bennington, and why it's been, just out of curiosity, easier, not easier, but we've been able to have driving instruction specific to this population in Brattleboro versus Bennington, outside of necessarily the actual availability of instructors. Because I'm hearing what you're saying, Wendy, and that makes sense, but I'm wondering how that's different than the model in Brattleboro. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know, Dean, do you want, I see my counterpart from Brattleboro's on this as well. I would say that it's not any different other than it's probably, no, we just started getting a lot more interest in Bennington around driving instruction. And I just received 2 referrals last week from some folks up in Manchester. So I think, in my opinion, I think some of it has just been, we're just starting to get them in Bennington. But I don't know. Dean, do you have any?
Sure.
If,
Good morning. This is Dean Matuicha. I'm the interim regional manager for the Department of Labor's Workforce Division in Brattleboro. Our team has been working with this population. I'd say the only difference that we have between Bennington and Brattleboro is that we've been doing this a little bit longer. We've been working very closely with the ECDC and the MCC and the driver's ed program for, gosh, I think it's probably about a year now. So we've had this system in place, and we've been working very closely with these other agencies to assist with getting the people getting their needs met. More recently, we've been working more closely on the case management side, as Wendy mentioned, braiding in the occupational skills training or the on-the-job training, the work experience component, also based on the needs of the participants themselves and how far along they are, as far as are they employed, where are they working, are we getting them in training, do they have a vehicle, do they already have a permit, which are, all of these barriers in place. And it's just been, we started a class on the 20th, which was Saturday, with 8 individuals that we were able to identify with the case managers, with our team, as well as the ECDC, and finding the best fit for those clients that we can pretty much get through the driver's ed class as seamlessly as possible. I'll share with you that I did get feedback from Uday. He's very excited about the motivation of this latest class. As a result, because of their English language skills are so good.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for the update. I think it's we're still unraveling a bit how to get it to scale. So I think that, all of these are good lessons learned, and we can keep the conversation going. I see Jen and then our Bennington folks. I know, Jen, your hand's been raised for a while. Thanks.
Yeah, just to be real quick here and say, this becomes just one of these issues of rural equity, that the reality is we have a really great transit system considering, but not only, does it have limitations, the kinds of jobs we have here are just very likely to require having a driver's license. So I just want to really emphasize the special need that in Bennington and Brattleboro, it is a really probably more poignant need to become employed. We invented a practice of enrolling people immediately in WIOA and helping them get learner's permits right away. So everyone has a WIOA case manager and should be in a position to formulate that work plan. If there's additional intervention that we, as the holders of, part of the Employment Services Grant and our partners need to do with our local VDOL office to ensure that that work plan is developed, which would identify the need for a driver's license, please let us know what that is. Because from the outside, we think that we're doing what needs to happen, which is bringing people into the system through that WIOA enrollment. And so I feel like there's kind of a disconnect here about there not being a plan that indicates the need for a driver's license. I'd love some education on that. And finally, I just want to say, yeah, WIOA is meant to be used for occupational training, and that's great. The reality is there's a lot of dollars swirling around in the education and training world, and that's just simply not usually where the gap is. And so obviously, we want to make sure that people access credentials and classes and all those things. And we're never going to let someone not access training because of dollars. But frankly, given where dollars are flowing into community colleges and tech centers and refugee stuff, the gap is the driver's license funding. So.
And
Great,
Jen, just quick follow up on your last point. Department of Labor would agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think we'll see a similar discussion around digital literacy in the coming little while, because it's something that if everyone needs it, it's often hard for the state of Vermont to understand who exactly should be funding it. Is it literacy? Is it workforce? Is it basic education? And so we will unravel these balls of yarn together quickly, we hope. And Grace.
I'm going to reiterate what Jen just said, which is that Bennington has been working to help people. Bennington volunteers have been working to help people learn to drive. I have personally worked with 25 drivers to get their licenses. The reason that it hasn't been on your radar at the Department of Labor is because I have gotten the licenses for people. I have been doing the driver's ed for people. I have been going to the Department of the DMV to do all the road tests. I have been doing it. And I'm doing it because every single applicant that goes to get a job has to have a driver's license. They're going to Mac Molding, which is 20 minutes drive away. They can't get on the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to a job that starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. They want to drive their car. And I am making that possible. It should be the Department of Labor that's putting it on their needs and getting them their driver's license. That is not my job. I have a full-time job already that I get paid for. And then I have this other full-time job, which is now driver instructor. That shouldn't be my job. This should be something that refugee resettlement does. So I just want to put that back on somebody else's burner so that I can do my actual full-time job, and then I can do fun stuff with refugees. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's why we need to know the need out there. You know, I think it's that we really need to know what the numbers are, because when we aren't tackling it all together, we know what's going to happen. And it's our volunteers will step up and they'll make sure things get done that need to get done, but that doesn't help us change the system in which you're doing that work. And so I think that's important.
Just FYI, my time this weekend, I spent 6 hours driving, 6 hours driving. That's a lot of near life and death experiences on a weekend.
Yeah. Thank you, Grace. Jack.
Yeah, I was also going to mention that, you know, the burden that this can place on volunteers and others in the community who really care about refugees and end up feeling like they're in a position where they have to take on responsibilities that are right on the edge of what they feel comfortable doing as well. As Grace mentioned, it can be nerve-wracking to drive with someone who's never driven at all before, much less in the United States, much less in Vermont, much less in the winter, right? And I also want to, you know, mention that here in the Bennington office, it's not through sort of lack of trying or lack of attempts on systems building on our part, but as was mentioned, like this has been happening for a longer time in Brattleboro, and so some systems are in place that simply weren't here. We did meet with Uday back in the spring, but at that point we didn't have people who were the right combination of WIOA enrolled and had a learner's permit. There were people who had one, maybe not the other, and at that point he was, you know, casting a pretty wide net and was willing to even create a pretty small class here in Bennington. However, once Director of Settlement started here in July, he was no longer available, and we would have had to have sent folks up to Rutland, which is really hard if you don't have a driver's license to go up to Rutland for a driving class. And then the latest information about a limited number of slots being open in Brattleboro, I think, is part of what precipitated our questions. And I'm really glad that it has all of us thinking and talking about this, because the need is growing here in Bennington. And as you heard so compellingly from Grace, people in the community are stepping up, and you know, it's a lot to have as a responsibility that you feel you're taking on. So, you know, the better, and as Kate Caitlin was saying, and I think Jen mentioned, like we have the same process here in Bennington. Folks get WIOA enrolled within usually a week of arriving to the United States. They have access to their WIOA case manager. They have support through Department of Labor. And so, you know, we have a pretty good system in place for getting people into a position where hopefully they'll be able to access driver's ed here in Bennington as well.
Great, thanks. Wendy.
Yeah, and that was actually just going to be my follow-up. Thank you, Jack, for saying that. Yes, we do have really strong connections with ECDC in Bennington, and are developing strong connections with the folks up in Manchester as well. So we have met with Yvonne and folks up there. So I do think you know, making that early connection to WIO is absolutely helpful in identifying whether or not driving instruction can be part of the employment plan, like right from the get-go, or whether or not that's something that gets folded in down the road as that plan develops. So, and we do really appreciate all the partnerships that we have with the folks in our community that are supporting refugee resettlement.
Great, thank you. Any other topics of discussion for our meeting today?
I was wondering if I could just bring up education for a moment.
Sure.
And sorry, I was trying to put up my hand and I couldn't find the hand. Yeah, just wanted to remind folks, with people arriving and staying sometimes in a place that's temporary, or maybe occasionally even in hotels and motels. And just for context, nationally, in almost every state, refugees are arriving and going directly into hotels, motels, Airbnbs right now. And this is very new. Only in the last probably year. Up until now, refugee resettlement primarily has been people arrive and generally they go right into you know, a rental situation. So it's a bummer to have to go into temporary. It's a little different in your area because you actually have a thoughtful approach to your transitional housing that's doing more than just housing people, right? It's really trying to situate people and connect them in a way that gives them stability. But just wanted to let you know, if you did have to move to hotels and motels, and I hope that we're able to figure out funding so that you're able to keep your model going. But if you did, it would not be unique in the country at all, to be frank, right? So this is actually happening all over the country. But what I wanted to talk about was the schooling related to that. And maybe a little different in your area, but I just wanted to clarify. If folks arrive and they're not in permanent housing, particularly hotels or motels or Airbnbs, if they're in that situation, but really anything that's transitional, the children who need to go to school need to be enrolled right away. Just wanted to really confirm that, because what we're seeing now are some delays in enrollment while families wait to see where they're going to be permanently housed. And sometimes there's a hesitation, but they do need to be enrolled right away. And they can be counted, depending on their situation, under the McKinney-Vento Act, which would see them as homeless youth. The benefit of that, for the purposes of school enrollment, is that it would allow them to enroll even if they don't have a lease in that area. It would allow them to enroll with very little paperwork. They could go almost immediately. And then if they were to move or temporarily have to go to another hotel for the following week because now there's a room open there, right? So this is what we're seeing up in Chittenden a little bit. That first district that housed them would have to then continue to transport them. So transportation is part of this. So they get transportation. They're required to provide transportation to and from school. So just really wanted to clarify that whatever you see coming, school enrollment will continue to be a priority. And if kids are temporarily housed, they will be covered under McKinney-Vento. Every school district has a homeless liaison who is also usually the vice principal or someone else in the district. And so just to let you know in advance, you know, checking in with schools and just letting them know that you might have a situation coming up where people might be in more temporary situations. Again, this might be fine in your areas, Brattleboro, Bennington, or Manchester. I believe that Grace is usually invited to these meetings. Is Grace on today? I'm sorry, Yvonne. Okay, Yvonne, go ahead.
Yeah, so we include Yvonne in all of these invitations.
Great. Okay.
I'm here.
Oh, great. Yeah. So just saying,
yes.
I don't have the video on, so I could see why you would confuse Grace with Grace Initiative.
Sorry, I always do that.
They're right
anyway,
next to each other.
Yeah, I just wanted to, so that's fine. Thank you so much, Yvonne. But yeah, just wanted to remind all the areas that if people are staying in some kind of temporary housing, reach out to the school. It's the school's responsibility then to connect with their homeless liaison. But if a school isn't very familiar with doing this, which I think most of them are, they should be able to work with you and very quickly get kids into school. Just really wanted to highlight that. Again, you might not be suffering from it right now, but if you were, I just want you to have that in your mind. And if there were any obstacles, you could pop it back to me and I can connect that school directly to the coordinator of the homeless liaisons for school. And there's the Agency of Education Homeless Liaison list. Again, ideally, you shouldn't have to work with them directly. Ideally, the school does that. But you could certainly reach out and let folks know in your region that this might be coming or this is what your situation is with refugees. Thank you.
I was just going to say that within WSCSU here in Southern Vermont for Brattleboro, our bus company is not run through the school district, it's contracted. And I know that some of, certainly not pushback in any way, but some of the challenges have been around bus routes. And like, I know we're like, I think at capacity at the moment for the bus run at SIT. So as much notice that can be shared in advance, I do know is certainly appreciated by the school district as well as, I think it's Kutzmarek bus company.
And the situation is the same here in Bennington as well. The schools don't run the buses. So that has also been a communication aspect of working with them.
Yeah, and then again, you know, just ideally remembering that in this situation that I'm talking about, it would be, the onus would be on the school, once you gave them the information, to make those arrangements and make that happen. Thanks.
Other questions on that? Or anything else? Great. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention that since the last quarterly consultation, ECDC opened its permanent office here in Bennington and Multicultural Community Center, which is the first multicultural community center in the history of the town of Bennington. So it's a really important step, not only for ECDC and refugee resettlement in the region, and hopefully puts us on a sort of path towards being even more regional in the way that we approach this work. But it's also a major step that the town of Bennington is taking towards becoming a more multicultural, diverse, and inclusive community. And we're really thrilled with the way that the town has been supportive of that and excited about the work that this space will allow us to do here.
Great. Yeah, great work. It's all involved in that. Really exciting stuff. Great. So I think that will wrap our official community consultation. I appreciate everyone who was able to join. I want to wrap with some shameless plugging of an event that our Welcoming Communities group is hosting this weekend. We call it a story potluck, and it's part of our ethnographic interview project. And so folks who identify as having an immigrant background are encouraged and welcome to come to the BCTV studios. You can either bring a real piece of food or a recipe or a story just to share. And then for the folks who don't want to stop talking, you'll be encouraged to be a part of our ethnographic interview project. So if you know folks who have good experiences, bad experiences, stories they'd like to share about arriving to Vermont, it could be as a part of this refugee resettlement project, or they may have been here for decades and really want to share what it's like to have been, to have arrived in the 80s, the last time we were doing refugee resettlement. This is a project that we are furthering, and for folks who are interviewed, you get a gift card. So we're paying everyone for their time to participate. So that's just the plug I have.
What kind of translation and interpretation will be available, if any?
So none explicitly, because it's a verbal practice. In, you know, if someone is interested in interviewing, which these are long form interviews, we'll get an interpreter for that, like an hour-long interview. This event is like everyone will go in a circle and give 3 to 5 minutes. And I think not having great English shouldn't be isn't a reason why people can't come and share anyway. So there'll be multilingual people here. are at the event, but it isn't a facilitated interpretation and translation, providing. Great. Well, thanks everyone for your time again. As always, you'll get a copy of this recording. We'll post it on our website, and we look forward to seeing folks again soon. Thanks, everyone.